All right, so let's move into the section we're calling Planning for Success. We at NCN really advocate that it's very important to take a detailed planning process when you're taking on the challenging project of creating a nonprofit center. For every minute you spend in planning, you're going to save at least 5 minutes in execution. And when you think about the scale of this project, that is a lot of time. And as we all know, time is money. So if you are in the process, there's quite a few pros and cons to doing a planning process. It's going to save you resources in the long run, help you make the case for a nonprofit center. It also demonstrates serious interest to funders and also helps to galvanize partners. On the negative side, it's going to take time and it will often cost. Full disclosure, we do quite a few feasibility studies for nonprofits in a consulting role, and those can range anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000. Or you can do it with other internal resources, but it will take time and it does take expertise. These are several of the components of a planning process. It's important to review your current organization's position, make sure that you're ready to take on this project. Do a market analysis to see who else is providing space in a similar manner, and to see if there is a need for the kind of space, the kind of vision that you have for this project. We also spend time getting clear on that vision and making sure that you know what your goals are, and then creating a strategy for you to pursue. The first question is always, are you ready for this? Before you get too far down the road with a project, you need to make sure that you are financially stable, you have stability in leadership, you have the ability to fundraise if that is an avenue that you are planning to pursue, and that you have the staff capacity to do this. I've heard of a lot of projects that get started and assign this task to an already overburdened staff member. So it's something that they're trying to do in addition to and above the work that they are already doing. And that can be a really challenging position for anybody to be in. It's also helpful to think through a SWOT analysis, and in your worksheet packet, you have a SWOT analysis template. So a SWOT analysis is your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So thinking through those lenses of finances, leadership, ability to fundraise, and staff capacity, I'd encourage you to take a few minutes with the SWOT analysis to think about what your strengths and weaknesses are. And then in the external factors, the opportunities and threats, are there any current opportunities in your community that might foster the creation of a nonprofit center or a shared space? At the same time, are there any threats? Are there large co-working organizations moving into your space? Here in Denver, we have WeWork that has just opened over 1,000 desk spaces for young entrepreneurs. While it's not the same market as nonprofits, many nonprofits office out of built spaces like WeWork because of their flexibility and their opportunity. So it's important to think about all of these different factors. There are two common methods that we see for planning a shared space. One is internal, where you have a planning committee that is volunteer run, brings in several of your key partners, often includes members of your staff. The external process is hiring a consultant. Then there's pros and cons in both of these scenarios. An internal process is often the most affordable option. You're using donated time and donated expertise. We've also seen many projects that work with universities using resources like student researchers. One of the challenges when you're using volunteers, though, is that they may overlook key details, and it's harder to time the process. You're doing this in addition to other work that's out there, and you don't necessarily have full dedication of any one person to the time. If you hire a consultant, you will get that full dedication to the process. They often bring expertise and or rigor and neutrality, but it can be expensive, and it's often a 3 to 4 month dedicated process. So Amanda's asking, is hiring a consultant the only reasonable option if you're not starting out of an already existing organization? Well, Amanda, I'd say that we're biased in that we are consultants, and it can be fairly efficient. Depending on the resources that are available to you in your community, though, if you have volunteers or people that have the time to do a rigorous feasibility study, you may be able to make that work. We've seen quite a few of these projects get up and running, but it takes time to figure out what else is out there. Laura, you've got a comment or question?
I was just going to say, Amanda, you are in Rochester, I believe, and you've got Al Siegel as a resource there. So for you, I would also suggest talking to Tom O'Connor at Al Siegel and getting some idea from him. He might have some resources that, that you could tap into.
Thanks, Laura. All right. So key questions that you should be looking for as you're doing a market analysis or a demand study is it the right time for your community for this particular project? Is there a pressing need from nonprofits in the area, or is there a particular problem that you can better address if you're working together or under one roof? Also, an important question is, can you afford to create it? Many of these projects end up becoming multi-million-dollar capital projects. So it's important to make sure that there's that financial capacity and ability to pay on the part of potential tenants. For groups that are targeting small 2 to 3 person organizations, it can be challenging for them to be able to pay rent after the building is open. So many of our models are reliant on nonprofits paying rent as a revenue stream. So that's an important factor to consider. The other component is there enough support in the community to sustain this project? Is there leadership, strong leadership that is willing to take on this challenge? And are they committed to the project for several years to come? It can be really challenging with projects if there is a leadership transition in the middle of the creation of a shared space, because a lot of these collaborations are reliant on trust and trust in your partners. So it's important to come up with the answers to these questions. So I want to dive a little bit into how NCN assesses feasibility. In a typical feasibility study, we conduct a visioning session to get partners clear on what the goal is, to get that mission and vision into a concise and concrete place. I've worked in projects that skipped the visioning step, and it's really fascinating to watch how the mission changes every time there's a new group in the room. So using this visioning state as a working hypothesis for your project. Then we go and do a demand survey where we're asking nonprofits really detailed questions about their space needs. Then we build on that with focus groups, do some real estate analysis, detailed financial modeling, and then we can also help groups understand the governance and decision-making process. In the survey phase, we're really doing quantitative research. We're looking to find out if nonprofits are interested in the vision that's being put forward. what their space needs are, square footage, how many workstations. Can also be a good place to test if groups are open to an open concept office. It's all the rage right now in co-working spaces, but a lot of nonprofits can be resistant to this model because there's a lot of need for privacy in many lines of nonprofits and human services. In some advocacy organizations, it's very important to keep your strategies private. We also look for flexibility and timing questions. When are the leases for their existing office spaces expiring? And do they currently own their building, or are they in leased space? If the majority of groups currently own their building, it can be a bit more challenging for them to join a shared space project. They already have that resource. We also ask questions about their ability to pay, not only what they are currently paying for their rental rates or but their questions are around what are they paying for their full occupancy costs of the space. The other thing we look for are any pain points. Are they growing out of their space? Are their lease going to expire and their landlord is selling the building? Or are there other concerns about the quality of the space? In some areas where I've worked, the roof is literally caving in on some nonprofit groups because we take whatever is most affordable and most accessible. Once we get the survey data in, we really dig deeper into focus groups. We get 5 to 10 interested representatives of organizations, potential partners, potential tenants, and we ask them questions to test our assumptions made based on the data. Oh, sorry, Laura just pointed out that Douglas has asked, what is the response rate you typically see on surveys? This ranges depending on the quality of list that we get from our clients, but it tends to be in the 15 to 20% rate, 15 to 20% range. So we really advise that you're surveying a large group of at least 100 to 300, although if you have been working with quite a few groups, you can, or if you've been working closely with existing partners, we've surveyed smaller groups. The response rates in those cases tend to be 80 to 100%. So back to the question around focus groups, we're really looking to find out more about needs and timing and understand what people are most interested in and what they're most excited on. It's fascinating to watch the process evolve from the survey stage to the focus group stage, because it's usually several weeks have gone by and people have started to dream about this concept of sharing resources and sharing ideas. It's also in the focus groups where we learn about many of the barriers to the project and unexpected opportunities. Many of these community members may know about off-market real estate opportunities. And we also test perceptions of the leadership, checking to see if our client is actually the right organization to be moving this project forward. Sometimes communities can be much more receptive to collaborations that are moving a project forward as opposed to one large nonprofit in the community or a foundation. Once we've gathered all the data, we move into an analysis phase to figure out how much of a building do you actually need? What is the demand going to support? How many tenants and what is their space needs? We often identify local comparable sites, whether it's an existing building or a new build, and work with local real estate experts or brokers to figure out what the cost to acquire those buildings would be, and also some of the renovation or occupancy costs. We use those numbers to develop pro formas, typically a capital budget and a 5 to 10 year cash flow, so people know what the business model of the space would be before they proceed further. So that was just a lot of information we threw at you about planning, but I want to give you a moment to think about how you are planning your project, and let's hear from you. It looks like many of you are in the early stages of building a center. There's a couple who already operate buildings. But what are you doing for the planning stages of your project? Feel free to enter your comments in the chat. If you're not there yet, take a look at the worksheets we've sent out in the Planning for Success section. There are a couple of activities to help you prioritize all the different parts of a planning process and what you should do first. There's no one right way to plan a center. The feasibility study process is just one component. I see a comment from Irene. So right now she is working on budgets and fundraising and also trying to find a master leaseholder for this center. So Mike has a great question. How do you reach out to potential participants that you've never heard of, or how do you find them? That is excellent. So for a lot of our groups, we advise them to work in partnership with other entities. If there are funders in your area or any kind of nonprofit network, I encourage our members to reach out to those groups to see if they have an email list that they'd be willing to share, or if they'd be willing to include a survey announcement in a e-newsletter. While you might get some duplicate responses to a survey, helping to put the word out through partners will give you access to new groups that you might not know of already or might not be working with already. Michael says that he's planning his project right now by talking to all the stakeholders, not just the nonprofits, but potential supporters. And the first question he gets is, well, great idea, but who's going to pay for it? That is always the biggest question. And having a needs assessment can help you figure that out. It can demonstrate that there would be demand, there would be potential revenue streams, and there would be some community support. If there are nonprofits that are interested in creating the space, that have a need, then it's a case that you can make to funders, and that can help build the project. Irene is asking, should you have a partner criteria in place before telling the public? I think that is a very interesting question. I wouldn't advise that you have a really strict partner criteria in place, but that you do have a vision, and that vision includes who your stakeholders are and who you're trying to reach out to. For Posner Center here in Denver, they always have had a vision of serving the international development community. And so they knew that their potential tenants would be international development organizations. So that helped them kind of frame and better tell their story. At the same time, they had to turn people away because they weren't a good fit, and they have a lot of people really wanted to be there and be in this really cool space, but having that mission and knowing what their resources were really helpful and key to that process. And then Susan had a statement. So she says, we live in a mid-sized university town, and she's pondering whether to keep tenants 100% environmental nonprofits or to invite similar missioned groups from the university to join us. I think that really goes to your vision for the project, but also kind of your business model. And if you, depending on how many nonprofits there are in that environmental space, you may be able to create an environmental themed space. There are quite a few in our network, including the Alliance Center where we're housed. But you can also bring in public sector partners. We see quite a few spaces that have local government offices as a tenant or service provider, or mission-related businesses. It's not just because you are a themed space doesn't mean you are sector specific. Yeah.
Susan, I just wanted to add, Katie mentioned the Posner Center. They did a demand analysis before they got started of how many international development nonprofits were there in the Denver area, and they found that there were 200. And had I known that when they were getting started, I would have been surprised if they could get enough tenants to make their model work. It turns out that they have 60 groups physically in their space, and then at least another 50 to 100 that are members that don't physically have a location at that space. So they have like 75% market penetration of international development nonprofits, which is just kind of incredible to me. I would have never believed that they could have accomplished that. But what happened was they became the place to be, and so every international development group wanted to be there. So the same thing for environmental groups. If you do a demand analysis and look and see who are all the groups, what's the universe of groups that you would like to have in that space, and then you could potentially populate it with all of those environmental groups. We would generally think that it would be hard to get to 75% of any market that you could attract. But we do know that the groups that have a buzz, that have a very clear vision and mission and a very clear value proposition that they're giving, like come and locate here because you're going to be with all of your peers, those centers do very well. Financially, they stay fully occupied because people are very clear on why they're there. So I would just wanted to add that.
All right, so we have, so Susan's asking about the membership structure. So for some centers, you will hear about members or virtual tenants, and virtual tenants don't necessarily have a presence in the space, but they join to access some of the benefits. So for some groups, they'll allow their virtual tenants or their members to use the address of the center as their organizational address. Other groups have a really active listserv or community, so being a member of that nonprofit center gives you access to all of those community benefits. Some also include an allocation of meeting space in the membership arrangement. So there's lots of different ways to set this up. So